Hello and welcome to the next video in the series. In this video, we're going to talk about if statements. They're also called conditional statements as well. Like always, we're going to go over the concept first with some examples. Then we are going to jump into some code. Now, once you learn if statements, it really opens up your programming to a new level, gives you a lot of options, and you'll see why in a second. So the best way to understand the concept is, again, to go through some real world examples of how we use if statements. We actually use them quite a lot in our day-to-day life. For example, if it's raining, take an umbrella. If you are tired, get some rest. If you're having a headache, have an Advil. So as you can see, we're even in our day-to-day talks that we have with everyone, we're using a lot of if statements. You can also think of if statements in games as well. If you press spacebar, it'll make your character jump. If you die 3 times, it's going to be game over. If time runs out when you're in a level, then you'll lose. There are times where you actually use if statements and there's more than one scenario. So, for example, a red light, if the light is red, you need to stop. Otherwise, if it's yellow, you need to slow down. Or else it's green and you can just go ahead, right? So there's more than one scenario that could happen, so you actually use multiple ifs to explain it to someone. There are also cases where we want to either do something or not, right? So for example, if it's sunny, we'll go fishing. If it's not, we're going to stay home. So it's either we're going fishing or we're staying home, one of the two. There are also cases where we need all the stars to align and we need multiple conditions to happen at the same time. So for example, we tell someone if it's sunny and there's no wind, we'll go to badminton. We'll go to play badminton. So it's not enough for it to just be sunny. We also need it to not be windy as well. So if it's raining, we can't play. If it's sunny, but if it's windy, we can't play either. So we need both of those conditions to happen at the same time. And there are cases where we need one condition or another condition to happen for something to get a result. So for example, let's say we have a tennis match. If you are injured or were late to the game is going to be forfeit. So, and we've seen this in professional tennis matches. So if they're injured or they're late to the match, the game is going to be forfeit. So either one of the two needs to happen. And then there are also times where we say a condition doesn't need to be true, right? So if you are not sick, you can come over. So that's also another case that we use as well. So with all these examples, I think the value of if statements and the concept is pretty easy to understand. Now the question becomes how to actually implement them in Java. So let's get into that. Formula for writing if statements in Java. So the first thing you need to do is pretty simple. It's just a good old if. So it's a good old if right like this. And then you do open parentheses, and then you add in your conditions. Close the parentheses, and then you open bracer. So you can open bracer, and then close bracer, and then you put your then statements. Now, if you have more than one scenario, like the red light example that we gave with the traffic light, you can write else if, and then again open parentheses, and then put your condition here, and then you can close parentheses, and then again you open bracer, close. And if you have the case where If it's not any of these conditions, otherwise you wanted to do something else, you can add an else at the end. And you don't need a condition for the else, because else means if it's not anything, any of the stuff that we said above, then it should just do whatever we want it to. Again, the then statements here. And then the statement here. So this is the general formula for writing if statements in Java. You can have cases just like we had in an example where you just have one if statement and you don't have any of the other stuff. You could have examples where you have an if and an else, because you have, if it's raining, we're going fishing, otherwise we're not. Or you can have cases like the traffic light where you're saying if it's red, do this, else if it's yellow, do this, otherwise you can go because it's green, right? It can only be one of those three scenarios. So this is the general formula. You can write it down somewhere if you want, or you can come back to the video, take a screenshot, whatever is more comfortable for you. So now how do we actually, let's talk about the conditions a little bit. How do we represent those? So how do we say is equal in Java? So the way you do that is you use two equal signs next to each other. How do we say not equal? You can use the exclamation mark with next to the equal sign. Is bigger and is smaller. And for those two, it's pretty simple. It's the same one that we use for math. So if you want to say is bigger, you can just use this sign. If you want to say is smaller, you can use this sign. If you want to say if it's bigger or equal to, you can use the bigger sign and the equal sign together. And the same thing with the smaller or equal to. How do we say and? So like when we were talking about using two conditions together, like if it's sunny and it's not windy, and how do we say or? And the way you do that in Java, you use two ampersand signs for the and. For the or, you use two lines like this. It's the button underneath the backspace on your keyboard. So now we have the tools to build out if conditions. And so the next step we're going to do is we're going to take some of the examples that we talked about in the first section and try to code them with pseudocode. And what I mean by pseudocode is we'll have some code and some English mixed together to make it a bit easier to understand. And then we'll move on to coding. All right, so now let's try to apply the formula to to some of these examples. So over here, let's try to write pseudocode for this. We're going to say if, we're going to start with if, and then we open parentheses, and the condition is if it's raining. Then we close the if statement, we open bracer, and we say take umbrella and close bracer. Okay, that's as simple as it gets. So let's try this one. If you're tired, rest. All right, and let's try one with the gaming one. So if you die, so if die more than 3 times, then game over. So now let's try some of the more complex one, and feel free to stop the video and try them yourself as well. All right, so let's try some of the more complex ones. So if it's sunny, go fishing or else stay home. So let's try this one here. So again, we're going to start with if. What's the condition? If it's sunny, then what we're going to do is fishing. So we either have to go fishing, otherwise if it's not sunny, we're going to use the else statement, open bracer, stay home. All right, so let's try this one. If sunny and not windy, go play badminton. So let's do this one here. So we're going to say if. Now we have two conditions. So if it's sunny, and if you look at the language reference, we represent and with two ampersands like this. So if it's sunny and not windy, so we say put exclamation mark to represent the not, and then we put it in front of windy. So if it's sunny and not windy, then we go to play badminton. So let's try this one now. We have three different scenarios. So if red light, we stop. Else, if it's a yellow light, we slow down. Otherwise, we can go. And last but not least, let's do this one here. So if you're injured, and we can represent or with the two lines, or you're late, open bracer, forfeit. And this way, you have basically written Java pseudocode for if statements. Now we'll jump into code. All right, so for the coding section, you can either create a new project or work on the previous one that we used in a previous lecture, completely up to you. I made a new project and called it if statement. You can follow the same steps as previous time to create the new project. So we're gonna split this coding section into two sessions. One is based on a real life scenario, and the other one is based on games. So for the real life scenario, we're gonna use teachers and students as an example, because I think everyone has had an experience like that. Using software like Blackboard or other things where you can check your grades and stuff like that. So let's write a function to start off that takes a grade out of 100. Now let's assume it can be whole numbers, so it's integers. I know grades can be decimals, but for this example, let's just say it's only whole numbers. And what it's going to do is it's going to take the grade, like for example, 85 or 75, and the function will return the letter for that grade. So for example, if you get more than 85, you'll get an A. If you get between 70 and 85, you'll get a B. Otherwise, you'll get an F. So give that a try. You can pause and try it, and then I can go ahead and show it to you. All right, so we're gonna add public static. And then the return type for this function is going to be a string because we're returning A, B, or C, or D. We can also return a character, but we haven't really covered that. So for now, we're just going to say it's going to be a string. And we're going to name the function. We're going to give it a good name. We're going to call it calculate letter grade. And the input will be the grade of the student. And so we're going to come here, since it's a whole number, it's going to be an int. Now we need to write our if statement here. So we're going to say if the grade is bigger or equal to 85, then we're going to open bracer, close bracer. We're going to return open quotations because it's a string. We're going to return an A. Now we're going to use else if because it's more than, this is similar to the traffic light example. There's more than one scenario that can happen. So if the grade is more than 70, more or equal to 70, and the grade is less than 85, if that's the case, then we're going to open bracer, close bracer, and say return B. If it's none of those two, then we can just say else. It's a fail. So they either get an A or a B, or they're going to fail. So we see the yellow line here. It's saying we don't need to put this, and it's right, because if it's bigger than 85, it's going to return A. But I'm just going to keep it there because it makes it a bit more readable. But you can remove this as well. That would be the function. Now let's try it out by putting in the main function. So we're going to say system.out.print, and we're going to call calculate letter grade, and we're going to give it an 88. So this person, if we did our code correctly, should get an A. And as you can see here, we got an A. So now let's try getting a 72, and this person should get a B. We can see that our function is correct. And if they get a 60, they should get a fail. And as you can see here, we see fail here. All right, cool. So let's move on to the next function. Next function, we're going to write a function that takes in a student name and returns their grade. So you know how sometimes you actually go into a software for school, university, and you want to see your grades. It pulls up your grade based on your name or based on your student ID. So that's the same thing we're going to do here. So we're going to assume that there are only 4 students, Jack, Jill, John, and Anna, and Jack got a 70, Jill got an 80, John got a 90, and Anna got a 95. So for example, if you call your function with the name Anna, it should return 95. But if you call the function with the name Jack, it should give back 70. All right, so again, we're going to do public static. The function is going to return their grade, which is a whole number, we're going to assume. So I'm just going to return an int, and then I'm going to give the function a good name. Let's say find grade. And then the input is the name of the student, so it's going to be a string, and I'll call it name. And we're going to open bracer, close bracer. Now we're going to use our if statement. So if the name is equal to Jack, bracer, close bracer. And then we're going to return Jack's grade, which is 70. Else if the name is equal to Jill, we will return 80. Is not a string, so no quotations are needed. Else if name is equal to John. Again, we're going to return 90. Else if name equals Anna. We're going to return 95. And what if it's none of these? And I didn't put it in the function description, but we're going to talk about it. So if it's none of these four, it means that the student doesn't exist in our system. So if it's none of these four, we're just going to return -1 because the -1 doesn't make any sense, which means that the student's not in our system. And I can show you something interesting with that. So over here, let's try our function. So let's do find grade. Let's add in John. So what did John get? John got 90. So if you run our function here, it should print 90. Oh, I forgot to put a semicolon here. So if you get an error, IntelliJ will bring you to that line and show you what the issue is, and you can fix it. So let's run it again. And you can see that John got 90. Great. Now let's do Jack. And you can see Jack got a 70. So if we run our code, it should show 7 here. Now let me show you something interesting. So if we put a name here that is not a part of our students, so let's put Peter. Now if I run this with Peter, it's going to say -1, right? Right, so let's do one more. So let's write a function that takes the grade of a student and it tells them if they've passed or failed. So they'll pass if they get above 60 and it'll fail if it's below 60. So give that a go. This one should be a bit easier. So we're going to do public static, and we're returning a string because we're either returning pass or fail. So we're going to say string, and let's call the function pass or fail. And then let's give the grade of the student, and you can use a float here for the grade as well if you like. And then we're going to say if the grade is bigger or equal to 60, we're going to be merciful and include 60 here. We're going to say return pass. Else. They're either passing or failing, right? That's why we're using the else here. So now we can test our function. So we can say pass or fail, and let's give 61, and it should be a pass. Looks like it's working. If they get a 59, it should be a fail. Okay, great. The code is working. All right. Now let's jump into some game functions. All right, so let's write a function that let's write basically a jump function. So if a player presses spacebar and their character is alive, they should jump, and we're going to represent jump by just printing out jump because we don't have any graphical tools at our hands right now. So we're just going to represent jumping by printing jump. And then for knowing if the player pressed spacebar, use a boolean which says is spacebar pressed or not. So it's either going to be true or false. And for the player is alive, we're going to again use a boolean is player alive. So it's either true or false. So give that a go. Right, so this function, we're going to write public static like before. Now, what's the return type of this function? We're not actually returning anything, right? We're either writing jump on the screen or we're not. So we're not really returning anything. So for functions that we don't return anything, the return type will be void, which basically means nothing will come out of the function. Now, the name of the function is the easy one here. It's just jump. For the input, we're going to say boolean is spacebar pressed. and then another boolean for is player alive. And this kind of coding is actually used whenever you're coding games. So let's go and open brace or close. Now what we're saying is if the player is alive and spacebar is pressed. So we're going to say if is spacebar pressed and the player is alive, we're going to write that's basically all we're going to do. So let's try it out. So we're going to say jump. Let's say the player pressed spacebar, so is spacebar pressed is true, and the player is alive. So both of them are true. We don't need, since we're printing the jump, we don't need to actually use the system out print ln anymore. So I can just comment this out, just write jump. And then inside the function, we're going to say spacebar is pressed. That's true. And the player is also alive. So if the player is alive and spacebar is pressed, we should see jump here when we run the code. Okay, perfect. But what if the player is dead? So if the player is not alive, which we say is false, then when we run the application, there should be no jump. Okay, great. Now if the player is alive, but the player hadn't pressed spacebar, we shouldn't see jump. Let's do the last part now. Right, for the last function for this video, we're going to write a function that takes in player health as an integer value, and the boolean has the level time elapsed. So this is something that can be true or false. Either the level time has elapsed or it hasn't. So what we're going to do is if the player HP has become less than 0 or the time for the level has expired, we're going to print game over on the screen. All right, give that a go. So again, we're going to say public static. Since we're just printing something on the screen and we're not returning anything back, it's going to be void. And we're going to call this function is game over. We're going to call it, and we're going to call this function check game over, and we're going to give it the player health, which is an integer, and we are going to give it a boolean as level time. Okay, open bracer, close bracer. So what do we need to check? If the player health is less than 0, or, and we represent or with the 2 lines. So again, if you can't find it, under your backspace button on your keyboard, there should be the slash. If you hold shift and click it, it should give you the lines. Or if the player health is below 0 and the level time has elapsed, then we're gonna print game over. Okay, so let's give this a go. Again, since we're using print inside the function, we don't need to use it in the main function. So we're just going to say check game over. So let's say the player has 50 health and the level time has not elapsed fully. So this is false. So he still has time and he has health. So he shouldn't get game over in this case. So we shouldn't see game over here. Cool. If the player's health is -1, but he still has time, he should still get game over because he's dead. We can see game over here. Cool. If the player has health, so he's at 100 health, but the time has passed for the level, then he should also get game over. There you go. So all of our functions are working, and I wanted to show you this game example because How many games have you played where you press spacebar and it jumps, or games where whenever your health falls below 0, you get a game over, or when the time passes, you can't play the game anymore. So these are really what's happening underneath those games. All right, I hope you like this session. As a preview of the next session, I just want to say, in the main function, you see how annoying it is that every time we want to test something, we have to keep coming here and change stuff, change the numbers, and I'll keep doing that over and over again. In the next video session, I'm going to go over tests, which would help us not do this over and over again, and make a robust system to check all of our functions without rewriting code. All right, thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.